All right, Kevin, thanks for reaching out to me. I really appreciate it. And it's always my pleasure to help a fellow golf professional. And, you've got a ton of athleticism. That's clearly obvious to me just by watching watching your swings and, looking at how you hit the ball. And obviously at the level that you play at, you still play really, really well. And you have a lot going on in your golf swing. So your ability to coordinate those things and ability to time those things just kind of further signifies how much athleticism you have. So this video is going to be a little bit lengthy because there's multiple things that I think need to change for you to play better golf. And some of these topics I have to go into a little bit of detail on, so just kind of bear with me. I'm hoping I can get through it pretty quickly here. Because we're playing golf, I've just drawn a little line here up the shaft plane and, at address, because your spine angle, you have bent forward and you've established sort of some forward bend here at address. So because of that, and because of the way we set up to a golf ball, we create inclination to the ground. So your torso is inclined, it's bent over and inclined to the ground. Because of this inclination and because we're standing to the side of the ball, our hands and the club move on very much kind of a circular path. I wouldn't necessarily use the term swing plane, but it's clear that the hands will move back up into the inside and the club head will move back up into the inside as we take the club away. And, I have a lot of flexibility in, what I like to see from players. I don't like to pigeonhole players into a specific model or a swing theory. But I do have some preferences in terms of how I like to see the club move and how I like to see the golfer move their body to the best of their ability. So, understanding that we should be, swinging the club and swinging the handle of the club in a back up and inward type of motion in this direction. I just kind of want to start here by looking at your golf swing on the down the line perspective. And that yellow line serves nothing more than just kind of a reference point of what a back up and inward motion would look like. So far in your swing, I don't see anything that's really out of the ordinary or extraordinary. Nothing that's problematic in my opinion. So the first part of your takeaway, I don't really think there's anything that needs to change. And you can see what I've done here is I put these little yellow marks. And what those yellow marks signify is just the position of the butt of the club. So you can see as I go frame by frame forward that your butt of the club, once your lead arm reaches parallel to the ground, which is about right here, the butt of the club moves vertically. So the butt of the club is no longer moving back up and in as it should, which tells me that the shoulders have really stopped turning. So if the shoulders stop turning, the hands will stop getting depth. And when I say depth, I'm just talking about in this general direction right here. So depth away from the ball in basically an inward fashion. So that's what I mean by depth. And from this point, your hands and the butt of the club just move vertically. So much so that your left shoulder, left arm is really kind of compressed into your chin here. I'd like to see this left shoulder much more down and down and around, and that left arm plane lower, something in this fashion here, so that the butt of the club is more probably over here in this fashion right here. So I want to get into a little bit of why the shoulder stopped turning, and it has to do with how your lower body and your pressure works in the backswing. So if you look over here at the face-on view, and just going to throw up a couple lines here. And all I'm doing here is just kind of bracketing the position of your hips at address. And you can see that the pressure initially starts to move into the right foot. By the time the club reaches parallel to the ground, the pressure is already moving into your left leg. So this is way premature. The pelvis is moving forward at an astronomical rate. So when you look at a golfer that's doing this, this is what I call a reverse hip slide. Amongst the better players in the game, the pelvis in the course of the backswing, when we look at 3D measuring, and I've measured probably 30 or 40 tour players via 3D, the pelvis is actually moving 1 to 2 inches to the right by the time it gets to the top of the backswing. And when I say to the right, I mean away from the target. And I would say that your pelvis has moved probably in the 3 to 4 inch ballpark towards the target. So the center of your pelvis. I go back to an address position. So if I just marked sort of the middle of your pelvis with a circle, that point in your pelvis, by the time you reach the top of your backswing, should be 1 to 2 inches more away from the target. Should be into your right side. And this premature shift gets your spine very much kind of tilting. Very much kind of tilting away from the target at the end of your backswing. Now this pressure is so far forward at this point, there's no way that you can rotate. The only thing you can do is to start kind of pushing up here, pushing up here, pushing up here to get the club down to the ball. And you get this huge tilt back move and a ton of right side bend going on. Okay, this is a twofold problem. So the issues that I see in your golf swing start with the butt of the club not traveling far enough back up and in. And because the butt of the club doesn't travel back up and in, it compromises the arm structure at the top of the backswing. The reason for the hand path moving vertically is what I'm showing you over here on the right side with how your pressure moves. Okay, and just an example of what that should look like. So kind of an example of what that should look like. If you look at Adam Scott here on the right, you can see that his left side starts moving away from that line. Left knee moves away from that line. Pressure really, really moves firmly into his right side here. So you can see that the pelvis is traveling in this direction. That pressure to the right is very much kind of an unweighting of this left leg, and that's critical in the golf swing to create speed, because we're going to use that momentum to create a ground reaction force, and that ground reaction force is going to allow us to push into the ground and receive a benefit from that action, which is going to actually speed up the club. And I don't want to go into too much detail on that because I don't want to make this video longer than it has to be, but we need to get you pressuring the ground into your right foot like you see Adam Scott doing here, and we need to get your pelvis working more away from the target at the top of the backswing. And then there's room for a little bit of lateral motion, as you see here from him on the way down. The problem is you get the lateral motion before you have even completed your backswing. And that movement pattern restricts your shoulder turn to the point to where your hand path doesn't get deep enough, and again the handle goes vertical. And again, here it is. You can see the pressure moving right directly toward the target. You get over here too fast. Now there's no way for the pelvis to rotate. All you can do is just kind of start early extending and standing up and tilting back. Okay? Now, coupled with the fact that the pelvis moves too laterally in the golf swing. When I say laterally, I mean in this direction. Because your pelvis moves too far forward too fast, it has a negative impact on your hand path. And what I mean by that is, as the pelvis slides this way, the hand path moves more in a straight down fashion. And what should happen is the left knee should rotate back to the target. The left hip should clear out of the way and rotate around to the target. And the lead shoulder should move in a circular fashion and open up and rotate back to the target. Those combined forces of rotation would create an outward movement of the hands and the handle. And that outward movement of the handle would cause the shaft to pitch in this direction. So think of it as the balance point of the club is somewhere right here along the shaft. Okay? Think about a teeter-totter reaction. If I move the butt of the club this way, the club is going to rotate around that center of mass, and the shaft is going to want to pitch in this direction. Okay? That's the shallowing effect. All right? But you don't get the outward force on the handle because your hips do not rotate, they slide. So therefore, what happens is you separate your elbows. When I say separate, I mean this one moves in this direction, and this one moves in this direction. So the gap widens, and the handle gets pulled straight down. And here's what that looks like. Right there. You can see the elbows split apart. Okay? Now the problem when the elbows are splitting apart, the wrist angles are changing. And here's what I mean by that. Let me define what I mean by wrist angles. If you look over here on the right side, flexion. Flexion is the bowing or arching. And when I say wrist angles, I'm talking about your left wrist, predominantly your lead wrist. Flexion would be bowing or arching your left wrist. So think Dustin Johnson or Lee Trevino, guys that played with a little bit of arch in that left wrist. Extension would be very much a cupping type of motion, it's anatomically known as extension. Okay, so that's what I want you to focus on: flexion and extension of your left wrist. And when you think about how your left wrist should work, I want you to think about how you would throw a frisbee with your left hand. You would swing your arm back, you would bow and arch your wrist, and then you would generate speed with your torso, and then you would fling your left wrist into extension and let go of the frisbee. That would give you the speed. You would snap that wrist out, and that would give you the speed on the frisbee. Well, that's very much how the left wrist should work in the golf swing. The problem is, in your case, when you separate those elbows, because I'll say this, at the top of your backswing, it looks like you've got a nice flat left wrist. And if you look closely, and I'll zoom it in just for, well, I can't, that's all the way in. If you look closely, this is a pretty nice little flat left wrist right here. So I would say that your left wrist at the top of your backswing is closer to flexion than it is extension. But when these elbows separate, and I'm just marking them where they're at right now, and you pull the shaft down, and those elbows widen, well, you can see what's happening to the wrist angle now. Your left wrist is going into a cupped or extended position. So two things happen when the lead wrist extends. Number one, the shaft steepens. Number two, the face angle will twist open. And Because the shaft steepens, this precipitates more of a late shallowing move to be made by you in the downswing. And what that late shallowing move is, you're going to start tilting your spine back like I showed you a second ago. And your pelvis is going to start working in towards the ball and underneath you. And you're going to have to start right side bending a lot through impact. Okay? And the right side bending is coming from the fact that your pelvis is shooting forward towards the target and your spine is tilting back away from the target. Let me throw your iron back up here. And I'm using the iron as an example, but trust me, all of these things that I'm saying are even worse with the driver because it's, you're trying to create more leverage. But again, so as you pull down, I'm going to try to match these frames up here. So probably somewhere in that ballpark. As you're pulling this shaft downward, putting that force on the grip that way, and you're extending that wrist, that shaft is steepening. When that shaft starts steepening, you sense that as a player, and you realize, well, the only way that I can shallow this thing at the last minute is to start tilting my spine back in this direction. And that's what you're going to keep doing here to shallow it out late. Okay? Now, this is why this wrist angle is why you miss your driver high into the right and overdraw it or flip it and pull it to the left. Because you're fighting this face position, this club face position. Remember, when the wrist extends, the face twists open and the shaft steepens. And then you start trying to lay it down late, and then you have to have sort of a last-minute flip release to rescue or save the shot. And it looks like the shot in this video either went way to the right or it started way to the right because, I'm looking at a target line that's probably somewhere in, this ballpark here, and I'm looking at a ball that's starting way out in this direction over here. So that's a classic example of what I'm talking about with that wrist angle. So to remedy that, let's go back to the beginning. You're not going to like all these changes, but I don't know any other way to fix this. You have to understand these wrist angles and what I'm talking about right now. And this grip is one of the big culprits of why you have so much extension in your wrist angles in transition. This super strong grip. The problem with a strong grip is that when the left wrist flexes in transition the way that it should in order to shallow the shaft, if you have a super strong grip like this, the face shuts, and then you hit pulls and pull hooks. So what I like to see is a much, much weaker left-hand grip, something along the lines of a Jordan Spieth or here's a Spieth grip. You can see his left hand there, nice and weak. Something more along the lines of this guy's grip. Let me try to zoom it in. You can see much weaker attachments there. That allows the wrist angle to go beautifully into flexion. And again, Jordan Spieth does it brilliantly. You can see his left hand grip there from the face-on view, and then from a down-the-line view, you're going to see what happens because of that. I'm zooming it in just a little bit. So you can see the nice little bow and arch he's got in that left wrist in transition. And watch how, as he pivots and turns, the shaft pitches. And it's a little bit blurry, but you can still see how bowed and arched the left wrist angle is there. So this video is getting just a little bit long, but I want wanted to be thorough enough so you could understand it. But you've got to fix The first thing we got to do is fix the backswing. Okay, we've got to get your pressure moving away from the target into your right side, allowing you to continue to rotate your shoulders. By rotating your shoulders more, we're going to be able to keep the butt of the club and the hands moving on this trajectory as you go to the top, instead of just vertical and lifting. So this butt of this club should be at least, 2 to 3 inches more this way. Shaft probably over here somewhere. Okay? From there, when you transition, we want the right elbow working towards the left elbow. We want the gap between the arms getting narrower, not getting wider. Okay? And what that's going to do is that's going to cause the shaft to where it's at right now to pitch from here to here in transition. We want the shaft pitching in this direction. And then from there, we got to keep the pelvis underneath you in the downswing and feel like you rotate and turn instead of sliding and tilting. And I'm going to give you 2 examples right here of what I'm looking for. Zoom this guy in just a little bit. Okay, so to the top, depth. Notice how the butt of the club keeps working back up and in, back up and in. From the face-on view, pressure moving right into the right leg, left knee working towards the behind the ball. Huge, big, full shoulder turn. In transition, you're going to see the hands moving in an outward fashion, shaft shallowing. Golfer staying bent over, and his pelvis is not shooting towards the target. You can see that he is rotating back toward the target. Now, there is some lateral motion in his golf swing, but the lateral motion is due to the rotation that's occurring in his golf swing. You don't see his hip sliding out from under him. Again, from down the line, you can see him very much rotating. All right? So that's what we need you to work on. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I hope this video helps you.